All right, well, good morning, everyone. I know a few more folks are popping onto the call right now, but thought we should get started. It's just now 10 o'clock. Good morning. My name is Jack McDougall, and I'm President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Today, we'll hear from Jamil Jaffer. He's Senior Vice President of Strategy, Partnerships, and Corporate Development at IronNet Cybersecurity. Jamil will share his experiences and insights across a wide variety of cyber-related issues, and I know this will be an interesting discussion. As we're talking, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. This conversation will be recorded and available on our website later this week. And so with that, let's get started. Good morning, Jamil. How are you?
Morning, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining with us. But hey, before we get started, why don't you share just a little bit about yourself and about IronNet Cybersecurity?
Sure, yeah. No, thanks very much, Jack. So we're proud to be members of the Greater Washington Board of Trade, proud to be on the board of directors for the board. It's been a great experience working with you guys. IronNet was founded about 5 years ago by General Keith Alexander, the former director of the U.S. National Security Agency and the founding commander of U.S. Cyber Command. And General Alexander, when he came out of NSA, wanted to help industry do better in terms of its defense. As you know, today, private industry is on the forefront of defending the nation and defending itself against threats from nation states, non-state actors, and the like in the cyber realm. And General Alexander thought that his experience at Cyber Command and NSA might be useful to industry. And what he realized very quickly was that there was a real gap in capabilities in the industry, both with respect to behavioral detection, that is identifying threats that we don't know about yet, as well as bringing companies, industries, and multiple nations together to defend one another in cyberspace, what we call collective defense. And so he set out to build a company to do that. And for the last 5 years, we've been working hard at that. Myself, I'm a recovering lawyer by background, so don't hold that against me. But I'm a technologist at heart. I grew up with a Tandy TRS-80 color computer from when I was little, upgrading from 4K to 16K of RAM. So I know a little bit about technology, paying my way through college, pulling cable, 10-base-C cable for networking at UCLA. And I worked for a number of years in the Bush administration, as well as on Capitol Hill, in national security roles at the Justice Department, the White House, and at the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So that's me.
All right, well, that's great. Well, thanks very much. So, all right, so obviously our world is a little bit upside down these days, dealing with a global health pandemic, dealing with devastating economic impacts of that. Stress levels are high. People are dealing with a lot of, health issues with folks. Small businesses are being really heavily impacted. And so we have this whole host of new things that are going on. But against that backdrop, talk to us a little bit about, cybersecurity. What's going on with cyber in this new world, and recognizing we've been at this now for about 8 weeks or so, where we've moved to, virtual working platforms and a whole host of other things. But what's going on? What are you seeing?
Well, Jack, you'd think that people would be coming together and maybe nation states would be tamping down their activities overseas and people just focusing on the immediate threat in front of them. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that. What we've seen instead is an increase in cyber activity, both by nation state actors and also by non-state actors seeking, unfortunately, to take advantage of this crisis. So you've seen increasing distribution of malware through people sending out links about COVID and saying, hey, get COVID information here. You click on the link. And you've now got this, you've been infected by this malware. And we've seen people doing that both from a collection perspective, as a nation state would, but also more often actually from a financial gain perspective, ransomware and the like. And so we've seen an uptick in that type of behavior. We've also seen, interestingly, an uptick in the cyber realm of what you might call covert and overt messaging. And so you've seen countries like Iran, China, Russia, talk about the successes they've seen with COVID or the challenges or sort of downplay the challenges they've seen and use both overt methodologies, so public messaging on the internet, but also covert messaging, pretending to be people who they are not, but sending messages about the role they've played and whether authoritarian states can do better in this space, whether they've been more successful and tamped down these things in their own home countries, and messaging about the U.S.'s role in this. And so we've seen a lot of things happening in the cyber realm from a cybersecurity perspective, things that you want to protect yourself against, as well as things you want to protect your constituents against, your employees and your staff against. And then, of course, this all takes place in a work from home environment where more people are working remotely. We're using VPNs and the like to secure connections. but we're having more and more conversations on platforms like this and others, where it's more of a target-rich environment for hackers and cyber actors who are interested in stealing intellectual property, are interested in obtaining communications, obtaining sensitive information, just because more people are working remotely, and at times you have to do things that are perhaps more risky than you would if you were in a work from your office environment.
So tell us a little bit. So what's maybe the most unexpected thing that you've seen as a result of this new environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been most unexpected is the fact that we've transitioned completely to a remote work environment, right? And so, I mean, and this isn't just in the United States or even just one industry. It's across multiple industries, across multiple parts of the United States, and across the globe. And so, what that means is we'd already seen a drastic increase in the speed, quantity, and criticality of information being communicated over the internet, right? And that has just doubled, tripled, quadrupled overnight as a result of the work from home environment. And so, Jack, if you told me 9 weeks ago, that we'd be all sitting at home for 8 weeks and just communicating like this and all of our meetings this way, I would have told you it's ridiculous, and told me that I'd be sending my company's sensitive intellectual property over the internet, admittedly over VPN and the like, but having conversations about technology on Zoom chats, on WebExes and the like, I would have thought that was a crazy thing to say. And I said, oh, there's a virus, whatever, in a few weeks, SARS, MERS, it'll go away. And here we are. And, let's be honest, even as some states start to reopen and some countries start to reopen, in a lot of ways, this method of communication and this method of working is going to be in place for a pretty long time, particularly if as they expect, as Dr. Fauci says, we see a second resurgence in the next few months.
Well, wouldn't you expect too that, part of the new normal after this is we will see a lot more teleworking, we will see a lot more an expansion of cyber networks and how that integrates in everything from telehealth to other platforms that we'll be able to use more effectively. I mean, it's interesting, I talked to some folks in different companies and they had long-term plans, over the next 24 months, they were going to move towards virtual call centers. They ended up doing it in 3 days when the pandemic hit. Right. So we've seen a lot of that come online much more quickly. Are we going to see a lot more of that here in the short term and even in the medium and long term?
Yeah, I think so for a number of reasons, Jack. One, people have sort of because they've had to, have sort of been culturally broken from their attachment to having to see somebody in person and be in the office, right? And new technology makes that easier, right? Being able to do seamless video conferencing and see multiple people at one time, as computer processing speeds go up, and as our communications bandwidth goes up, and we see the advent of 5G, more and more of that was going to happen anyways, and we'll see an acceleration of that trend because people are now broken from their cultural biases of having to do stuff in person. That being said, I also think there's another reason I think that trend will continue to expand and part of that is, and unfortunately, we've seen a lot of economic dislocation as a result of COVID, and a lot of people have lost their jobs and are sitting at home. A lot of people are going to need to be put back to work, right, to make the economy really restart. And if you think about the way that people are going to get back to work, a lot of it will be, virtual call centers, work from home, doing stuff for the safety of their own environment, particularly if, as we say, there may be a resurgence of this virus, or as more viruses like this start to spread, people will be inclined to work from home. And, let's be honest also, if kids aren't in school, Jack, some parents are going to have to work from home. And
right.
That's one of the other big things. We don't know when schools will reopen. And parents can't, even if offices are open, you can't get back to work if one of your parents has to be at home watching the kids while they're on doing virtual education. That's another challenge that we've really thought about. And by the way, that challenge will be one that tends to be regressive because people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale will have to be there with their kids and won't be able to get out and work. And that's going to make it even harder to come out of this challenge that we're facing right now. And I think that's one of the things to think about.
So one of the things that we've heard a lot about too, as we start to recover and move into these recovery phases, is this whole notion of contact tracing and thinking through. Have you looked at that at all? And, particularly what are some of the potential technology solutions that are emerging out there? We know that Virginia, Maryland, and DC all have programs underway right now where they're bringing in teams of people to work on that. But as we think about long-term solutions, it seems that we're going to need to have some more technology, or at least a workforce that's more technology enabled to do that. But that raises a whole host of questions around security issues and privacy issues and data management issues. What does that look like? And how can that help reassure folks and rebuild confidence in our economic structures?
That's a great question, Jack. I mean, I think you've seen a lot of work that Google and Apple have been doing right now on contact tracing. A lot of these devices in our pockets, right? These iPhones, these Android devices have the ability to identify when they're in proximity to another device, right? We see Tile use that technology all the time to find your keys or stuff you've lost. But each of these devices has Bluetooth LE, it has near field communication. It also has the traditional locational detection, GPS, and the like. And so if you have that information, or you're willing to make that information available either to a provider or to the local health authorities or to your employer, who says, if you want to be able to come into your workplace, you've got to tell us whether you've been, you've got to be able to identify whether you've been in contact with anybody who might have the virus in the last 14 days. You can imagine some workplaces, particularly the government, doing that. And so being able to collect that data, identify who's been in proximity to another device, to another person, right? For how long and when. Those are things that can help you identify where these people in contact with somebody who is infected, and can you work it back to who else they might have affected. Now, that being said, there are obviously huge privacy implications of that, right? I do think that Google and Apple have been smart in doing this in a voluntary way and saying, if you want to participate, you can, and they're rolling that out, and they're putting in place a lot of privacy protections. That being said, I think there will be pressure by the governments, and as they ought to, in order to protect their larger population, and with workplaces in order to protect their workforce, to give up some of that privacy and share some of that data. So how you share that data in a secure fashion, how you share it in a HIPAA compliant fashion. Remember, this is health data, or could be health data. How you share it in a way that is privacy protected, but also achieves the goal of identifying potential threats, both to you and to your coworkers, and your friends and family, I think is an important thing. I think ultimately you'll see, Jack, a lot of people opt in because, Americans, we care a lot about our privacy, but ultimately when it comes down to a potential threat to our health or safety, we're willing to give up some of that. And what we have to make sure we do is, as we're giving up that amount of privacy, that we ensure that they'll be used for the right purposes, and it's a narrow use, and it's not just sort of knowing everything about everybody at all times, because again, that has its own implications that I think the American people are concerned about legitimately.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier about some of the traditional actors in this space, Russia and China, North Korea. We're all familiar with Nigerian princes and folks like that with huge bank accounts. Are there any new players emerging that you're seeing? I mean, are there others that are beginning to take advantage of this new environment that we're in?
Well, Jack, certainly all those big players you mentioned, China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, are definitely active in this space, some more than others. China, particularly on the covert messaging front, Russia on the covert messaging front, Iran across the board. At the same time, there are new actors, right? We've already seen the dramatic spike in ransomware, both by nation states, but more importantly by non-nation state actors, financial criminals, hacker gangs out of Eastern Europe. And I think we'll see an uptick of that. I think that unfortunately, as the old adage goes for nation states, never let a crisis go to waste. The same is true, unfortunately, of bad actors who want to make money off of this. And so we've seen, obviously, inappropriate price gouging when it comes to masks and the like. But I'm worried more about the cyber theft and the risk that poses to companies being held hostage by criminals who want a payment. But also potentially our elections being affected. Not, again, I'm worried bigger picture about the Russian and Chinese efforts to conduct covert influence with respect to our upcoming elections. But I'm also worried about ransomware actors who sort of go after a voter database in the state, knowing the state will have almost no option but to pay if they can't get access to that voter database, and try to hold people hostage. And I think that's a real problem, and we'll see an uptick in that. The other trend, Jack, that had already begun that I think will accelerate as a result of COVID is we'd seen a lot of leakage of national capabilities, right? Alleged nation state tool sets in the cyber realm, whether it was the United States or the Russians and their capabilities allegedly being leaked on the internet. Well, now that those are out there and a lot of them are available in their binary form, that means that the average actor can upscale their own capabilities by using those tool sets, packaging them differently, using them to do different things. But the fact that some nation state tool sets, and admittedly ones that are perhaps older and maybe the prior generation of technology, but the fact that they're out there, it's almost like, handing out AK-47s on the sidewalk to criminals and saying, hey, here you go, a loaded gun, right? In the cyber realm, that's a real problem. And we got to think through how to do that. And so defending individual companies, but working together with multiple companies and multiple industries, I think is going to be really critical if we're going to stand the test of time and really defend this increasingly important space of information technology and communications technology.
you talk a little bit, you've talked a little bit about both industry and government. What was the overall posture and relationship with regards to identifying the threat landscape and responding to it prior to COVID-19 with regards to collaboration and integration? And then what do you see emerging now, and what should we be thinking about, and what can we be advocating for with regards to enhancing security as we go forward?
It's a really important question, Jack. You know, the government for a long time has talked about its desire to share more information with industry and help industry get better at defending itself. You know, one of the and that's a really important piece, because one of the weird things about the way we think about cyber defense, and I've always thought about it, is the private sector is in the lead on cyber defense when it comes to protecting your own company, protecting your own industry. And what's odd about that is that's not how we operate across the world generally, right? When it comes to nation state threats by Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, we expect the government to defend us against those. We don't expect Target or Walmart to have surface-to-air missiles on the roof of their warehouses to defend against Russian Bear bombers, because that's the job of the government, right? It would be crazy to ask that of them. We expect them, sure, to have high fences, armed guards, guard dogs, and the like. But beyond that, we expect the government to take the role. In cyberspace, because the way our industry has grown up, and also because of our concerns about privacy and government surveillance and the like, we don't want the government sitting on the boundaries of the U.S. internet, even if you could identify those boundaries, right? We don't want the government doing that, nor have we resourced the government to do that. So even though we have a U.S. Cyber Command, and Leon Panetta back in 2012 said it is the mission of the Department of Defense to defend the nation in cyberspace, the reality is that the nation has never expected that, nor have we resourced the Department of Defense to do that, nor do we necessarily want that from a privacy and civil liberties perspective. So then the question becomes, well, how can you reasonably expect JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, or a small mom and pop shop to defend itself against a committed Russian nation state actor or the Chinese or the like? And the answer is you can't. And so the question, then the question is, how do these two entities work together to really scale up their defense and really allow the private sector, which is ultimately going to be on the front lines, to benefit from national information and national capabilities? And there, I think, is the real key. And for better or for worse, the Department of Homeland Security has done a really good job trying to get information about the larger scale nature and scope of the threats out there. And they've begun to share information through their automated indicator sharing system. I think that if you ask the Department of Homeland Security and Chris Krebs, who runs CISA there, I think he'd tell you there's more work to be done. I think industry would definitely tell you there's more work to be done. And so the question becomes, how do you move that to real time? How do you share the information from national collection? I mean, and when I say national collection, I mean the best capabilities that we have in cyberspace from NSA, from Cyber Command, from our military, from the CIA. Get that data into the hands of the private sector in an actionable form and allow them to defend themselves while still protecting the source and method of that intelligence collection. That's a tough nut to crack, but it's something we have to do if we're to succeed as a nation. And I think the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, whose report unfortunately came out during COVID, said it exactly right. We need a new social compact in this nation, which is how the industry and government can work together and commit to working together at speed and scale to really defend the nation when it comes to cyber threats. Because ultimately, you know, an attack on JP Morgan, an attack on Citibank, an attack on Target or Walmart, if it has the spillover effects that we expect, could have huge national economic implications and huge national security implications for us as a nation.
But we do have pretty good standing protocols in place with regard to critical infrastructure. So if you think about things like the power grid and other things, we've included financial services in a lot of those as being part of critical infrastructure. And then what you're talking about now, though, is really expanding out. When you think about the economy at large, really the economy is critical infrastructure. And aren't we really learning that right now as a result of COVID?
It's amazing that you say that. I think that you're exactly right. Whatever people might think of the Trump administration, I think that they made a point early on to sort of say something we've always known, which is that economic security is national security. And I think that's exactly right. And the Cyberspace Solarium Commission actually doubled down on this exact point and said, we have continuity government plans. We have all sorts of continuity plans. What we don't have is a continuity of the economy plan. And I think the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report was exactly right to highlight that concept and this idea. And we're seeing it with COVID, right? We don't really have a plan for restarting the economy. We're going to do it. It's going to happen. It's going to be successful. But because we didn't plan for it, it's going to take us a little bit longer than it should have. And there'll be more economic pain as a result. And so if we start planning for not just pandemics, but cyber threats too, and say that we need to have a structure to have the economy continue while we're in a state of extremis, but also to restart and get bigger and better. Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote the book Black Swan, wrote a book in 2012 that I actually hadn't read until this past month, called Anti-Fragile. And what it talks about is, when we think about fragility, we think about the opposite of fragility as being resilience. Well, it turns out Nassim Taleb makes a credible argument that the opposite of fragility is not resilience, but it's being anti-fragile. That means it's the principle of being not just being able to withstand something that causes you harm, but actually gaining from it and becoming stronger as a result. And he says, if you look at everything that's successful, including the environment and Mother Nature, it's because it strengthens itself when something bad happens. And so I think it's really important that we think about cybersecurity and economic security as needing to be anti-fragile, not just resilient, but actually gaining from the challenge that we face and getting better and stronger as a result. I think we see that China is hoping that they'll have that turn happening now. I think the U.S. needs to start thinking that way going forward.
You mentioned the Solarium report now, commission a couple times now. Tell us a little bit more about that and in your role in that, General Alexander's role in that, and what are some of the outcomes from that effort?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. It was stood up by an act of Congress. It has 4 members of Congress on the commission itself, which is unusual typically for these commissions. They tend to be expert blue ribbon commissions from the outside. So you've got Congressman Mike Gallagher, Congressman Jim Langevin, a well-known cyber expert. Mike actually and I shared an office back a number of years ago when he came out of the Marine Corps to Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and since then he's gone on to run for Congress and representing the Green Bay Packers in Congress. I, of course, am sitting here with you and at IronNet. Not that I don't love my job, but I mean, it's pretty amazing for the guy who sat next to you to be a congressman. Ben Sass from Nebraska, and Angus King, independent. All 4 of their members of Congress played an important role in the commission, but they also had great outside experts, people like Sam Rabbit from the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, Frank Salufo from Auburn University, Tom Fanning, the CEO of Southern Company, a lot of really important experts, Chris Inglis, the former deputy director of NSA, and they came together and they said, let's take an outside look, a blue sky look at cybersecurity and think about a big picture. Some of the big things they talked about were continuity of the economy, the idea that we need this collective defense posture with industry coming together with government at scale and speed, the idea that we need to identify systemically important critical infrastructure and give them special attention from the government, but also expect more from them, expect them to defend themselves better in this space. So a lot of really important concepts, the idea of a Senate-confirmed cyber director in the White House, a lot of really important things in that commission. General Alexander and I had the chance to be part of it. We were asked to come in as outside experts and red team members to sort of critique the approaches that have been taken and sort of give them some thoughts and guidance. And so we did that, and that was a great experience. But I think where the rubber hits the road on this thing, Jack, is they've now come out with upwards of 75 recommendations. A lot of that is on the administration, whether this one or the next one, whether that's President Trump or Vice President Biden, to implement them. It's all going to still be on Congress and these members of Congress that we just talked about to put those recommendations in place. Some of the big things that they have to do require some legal changes. And so we'll see what happens with that. I wouldn't say I agree with every single last recommendation, but it's definitely worth reading. And you can find it on solarium.gov. You can also find a short version of the collective defense piece on IronNet's website at ironnet.com.
It seems one of the things right now that oftentimes you see is that cybersecurity is almost used as a strategic advantage. There's a lot of professional services firms that provide services to companies. But when you think holistically about supply chains and you think about vulnerabilities and you think about this as a system, you've talked a little bit about both overt and covert. You've talked a little bit about integration. You've talked about public-private. You've talked about all these things. You've talked about, that we don't need, anti-ballistic missile systems on top of Walmarts and the rest of it. But I mean, do you see this emerging into a much more of a national defense posture and becoming a much more sort of an integrated platform? Because so many companies and organizations out there, even think about nonprofits, for example, large nonprofits with extensive databases and relationships with other folks within the economy.
The Board of Trade, say.
Right, the Board of Trade. I mean, it's so the intersections and the networks are just so massive. I mean, how is it that you can just continue to individually tackle this, or does this really need to be a national priority with that kind of scale?
Look, Jack, I think there's no question in my mind it has to be a national priority, and it has to be a priority that we elevate not just at the government level. The government cannot and should not do this on its own. It doesn't have the capability or the resources to do this, nor again, as I said earlier, do I think that we want the government to take on this mission completely. I think the government has a lot more responsibility to take in this space. I think they have to be willing to collect information and intelligence and share that with the private sector to empower private sector defense. And I think industry has a role to play too. And that means industry has to come together. You know, one of the great things the Board of Trade does, Jack, is to bring together disparate companies, disparate parts of our economy, you know, 3 jurisdictions, right? DC, Maryland, Virginia. I mean, really bring them together in a lot of ways to think collectively about challenges. One of the things that you and I have worked on together extensively is creating a regional smart region effort, right? What we call the connected DMV, right? And in doing that, one of the things you have to think about is cybersecurity, because all this entire region is so tightly connected and so tightly interwoven. And that means operating across multiple industries, thinking about data privacy, thinking about cyber security in a different way. The same is true, Jack, across our economy, right? If it's great that, you know, today Bank of America and Citibank and JP Morgan work together tightly. We need to do more of that, right? But JP Morgan, Bank of America, Chase Manhattan need to be, and the like need to be working with Southern Company and AEP and all the major electric providers, and they need to be working with Cardinal Health and Blue Cross Blue Shield and the like, in order to because the same attackers are coming up against them in each of those industries, and all of them can't be expected, even if they come together in industries and even if they come together across the economy, without having the capabilities that governments have to identify threats and having that tightly integrated. We're not going to succeed. And so, you know, we've seen a lot of hacking in cyberspace. You know, General Alexander, when he was director of NSA, said that the theft of intellectual property from the United States was the greatest transfer of wealth in modern human history. That's accelerated over time, Jack. And, you know, as our economy moves more and more from a purely industrial, commodity-based economy to a technology and innovation economy here in the United States, I think that we've got to protect that intellectual property. If it walks out the back door, we're not going to succeed economically, and we're not going to succeed as to be able to lead in this global environment. And so I think it's critical that we come together. How do you do that in an environment where people are challenged economically? I think that's even harder. But the government's got to step up, and industry's got to be willing to share that data and come together. And that's hard to do. And we've been talking a lot about that. Now it's time to action it.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about that. It's been ongoing for a long time, and it is time for action, and it is hard. But what are one or two things, what are one or two primary barriers out there to getting this done? Or what are one or two things that we really need to do in order to elevate this to that sort of a level? Because some of our adversaries out there, I mean, if you think about how China engages in a very, very coordinated cyber strategy across a whole host, both from an economic perspective, from a societal perspective, from a national defense and security perspective. I mean, it's massive in how they undertake that. And yet it seems like we still kind of address it as sort of an ad hoc afterthought kind of an issue. I mean, we talk a lot about it. We have lots of conversations like this. I do think that we're moving farther along on that path, but still not far enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, you know, I think there's a lot to say in unpacking that question. I think you're exactly right. I think one of the challenges, one of the things that makes America so innovative is that we don't think generally in 15, 20, 30, much less 100-year increments. We think a week, a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years out, right? And that makes us hugely innovative. We move rapidly, we pivot rapidly, we're able to innovate very quickly. At the same time, without having this long-term vision about where other nations are going, the way they're planning and structuring their economy and the way they're operating in this environment, as you say, it's sort of a whole of nation approach. We're challenged in succeeding against them. And so and we've known this for a long time. We've relied on our innovation. Now the problem is some of that innovation is walking out the back door. And it's being used economically by these nations that do have longer-term planning horizons to accelerate their capabilities. And you see that happening most directly with China. So a few things I think that we could do immediately that are actionable now to really upscale our defense. I think one, we fundamentally have to recognize China for what it is a strategic competitor. And we also have to recognize that we're not going to decouple our economy from China. That's unrealistic. It's not something that would make sense. They won't benefit from it. We won't benefit from it. We have to figure out how to smartly take advantage of the fact that we do have manufacturing capabilities here in the United States, that we need a domestic manufacturing capability when it comes to critical technologies like quantum, like chip manufacturing, like medical capabilities and devices, right? I think the COVID pandemic has demonstrated that very clearly. So we're gonna need a national strategy, a national approach to that. And that doesn't mean a command and control economy, but it also means that, you know, we've always thought that it was okay to quote unquote buy American or build American when it came to national defense, right? We've done that for decades. There's no reason to think that communications technology, high technology, and pharmaceuticals and the like aren't things that need to be done here, just like tanks and bombs. And so we need an industrial policy when it comes to that, and that's an important thing to think about as we go forward. I think the other thing that we can do actionable is to change our sort of approach that we take to these things, right? Which is that we've always been, the American private sector has always lacked a certain amount of trust with the government, or at least has in recent days. And maybe that's, because of Edward Snowden and whatever, right? But there's been a gap in trust between the technology sector and Washington, D.C. And there's been a lot of time about rebuilding that trust, but let's just be candid, right? That trust doesn't exist at the level it needs to today, and both need each other now more than ever. And it's important that that we rebuild that trust and we rebuild that credibility, and that we start doing that today, not tomorrow, not a week from now. I think that's something we can action immediately. And I think the things like the work that the Board of Trade is doing with the Smart Region movement can help do that, because that raises important questions about privacy, civil liberties, and the benefits that collecting data and putting it together can really bring to the average citizen, whether here in the DMV region or across the nation as a whole.
So what's your view on offensive versus defensive measures with regards to cybersecurity? And historically, we've been fairly defense oriented. Yeah. It seems we've moved to a little bit more of an offensive position there, but how does that work?
Yeah. Jack, a lot of people say that deterrence doesn't work in cyberspace. And I think that's a load of nonsense. I think deterrence does and can work in cyberspace. We just don't practice it, right? And what do I mean by that? Well, in order to deter an enemy, you have to show them you have a capability. You have to show them that you have a will to respond. And you have to show them that you actually, in fact, will actually do it, right? And so today in cyberspace, we don't do that at all. We don't talk about our capabilities, in part because they historically grew up in the intelligence community and behind closed doors at NSA and CIA. So we don't talk about the capability. We don't sort of parade our weapons around. There's no cyber version of an air show, right? We don't talk about when we do actions, right? What they look like and what we've done, in part because, again, we want to protect that capability. We don't talk about what our red lines are. What do you have to do to make us respond, right? We know where our red lines aren't. Apparently, if you try to go after our election capabilities or undermine confidence in our political system, we won't come back and hit you hard. We might do little things here and there and slow you down in the next election cycle, but we're not really going to hit you hard. And then we don't actually carry those things out. And so, until we're willing, and you're right to say that we've become more aggressive. We have now a concept at Cyber Command that they call persistent engagement or defend forward, where we act on overseas systems against our cyber attackers before they hit us. And so we've been more forward leaning and given them more leeway to do those things. That's a good thing. I think it's a step in the right direction. But until we're very clear about what our capabilities are, we don't have to talk about all of them. We have to give away all the secrets, right? We've maintained classified defense programs for decades. We can still do that, right? But we need to talk about what our capabilities are. We need to talk about what our red lines are and what we will and won't tolerate. And then when those red lines are crossed, we have to be willing to enforce them, right? We've seen over and over again that our enemies think today that we are not willing to stand by our red lines. We're not willing to actually take action against them. I think the administration was smart in acting aggressively against Qasem Soleimani and the Iranians when they attacked the U.S. embassy and killed folks on our bases there in Iraq. I think we need to be willing to deter and act aggressively. It doesn't always mean bombs and missiles. It doesn't always mean cyber offensive weapons, but at times it does take that, and we need to be willing to do that. People have often thought, well, we live in a glass house. We're so reliant on cyber. If we hit them in cyber, they'll hit us back. I have news for folks. They're hitting us already in cyberspace. We are under constant attack. We are under constant theft. The idea that our enemies will get more aggressive if we get aggressive against them, I think is actually the opposite. We need to show that we're willing to push back. And when we do, then we'll see. But right now, we've been unwilling to do that. I think we need a little more offense to really buttress our defensive efforts.
So when we look at that, so how resilient are our cyber systems from your perspective right now?
Look, I think that what you've seen for the Director of National Intelligence in his testimony about a year and a half ago before the Senate and House, he said, look, our enemies, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, those three primary actors have the capability to engage in significant dislocations of our electric power in localized areas, our gas supplies, the like, but they haven't taken those actions yet. And the question is why haven't they? And the answer is they recognize probably that there is a red line there. We haven't necessarily made it clear, but I think they recognize that manipulating votes, right, taking down part of the gas pipeline infrastructure, the electric grid, right, it's fairly resilient, right? We have strong concepts in our energy community about how about mutual assistance that happens in the case of a natural disaster. Those same protocols apply in the cyber realm, and a lot of work has been done to really put those in place, both for the financial sector, the energy sector. That being said, our enemies still have the capability. They haven't done it because they know we'll be resilient against it, and they know that we'll respond, right? And so the question becomes, how do we demonstrate to other actors who might have increasing capabilities, non-state actors, and these smaller players like Iran and North Korea that are coming up and are having more of those capabilities, and that will have more of those capabilities in the future, that we would act against them also, and we'd respond, and that we'd see those as sort of the equivalent of a actual physical attack. And then on the other side of it, how can we continue to increase resilience, right? It's one thing to say you can recover, right? You can take a hit and then get it back up quickly, right? It's another thing to say that we can actually gain from that. And as we see these attacks coming against us, we're getting better and better on the defense. Again, this whole concept of being anti-fragile. We haven't yet gotten to that point with our economy, as we've seen with COVID, nor with cyber defense. I think we need to adopt that mentality. And again, I've just been starting to learn about this concept, so I might have some pieces of it wrong, but I really do think in this moment, it really is an idea that we need to be thinking about not just being resilient, but being able to gain from a challenge that we face.
So you brought up elections a couple of times. Let's just talk through that a little bit, and exactly how is it? I mean, we're not necessarily seeing people affect vote tallies,
right?
But how is it that they're infiltrating in these systems, and how is it that they're potentially manipulating outcomes? And what are we doing in preparation for this year, particularly against the backdrop of COVID-19? And I know CISA is one of their main priorities right now from Congress is around protecting our election systems and what that looks like. And so how is that working? What are we doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jack. I think a couple of things. One, I worry less about vote manipulation for a few reasons, right? One, I think that a lot of nation states recognize it probably as a red line, and that we'll see that as the equivalent of some sort of a physical attack. How aggressive we'd be and how much we'd respond, I don't know. And I think it would be helpful to be more clear for us to be more clear about that. But I think they recognize that vote manipulation might cross a line and a threshold. Also, because our states run elections, we have a lot of diversity in the systems we use, right, across multiple states, even across multiple local jurisdictions. That diversity actually is very helpful, right, because it means you've got to be close into the device. You have to understand it if you're going to try and manipulate votes. I worry less about vote manipulation. I think it's a hard thing to pull off at scale, and I think we may see efforts at that, but I don't worry about that. What I do worry significantly about are a couple of other things. One, our voter databases have challenges. They can be exposed. We know that the Russians were in our voter databases in various states during the last election cycle. They didn't do anything as far as we're aware, but you could imagine ransomware, holding those things hostage, manipulating information in the voter databases, making it harder for people to vote. The Help America Vote Act, which was enacted after the Bush v. Gore debacle back in the early 2000s, benefits us because we have people are able to cast provisional ballots even if they're not in the database or there's a problem with the database. And so we have some methodologies for addressing that. That being said, it could cause havoc, and that's something we should be worried about. My biggest concern, though, when it comes to both election manipulation but sort of political manipulation more generally, is the really effective activities the Russians were able to carry out in the lead up to the 2016 elections. That is to say, posing as Americans, creating messaging on both sides of issues, right? Whether it was the Black Lives Matter movement or Trump v. Clinton or whatever, we saw the Russians playing both sides of the game, creating dissension and discord in the American body politic in the lead up to the elections. And since then, we've seen the president and Congress both hampered significantly their ability to get things done for the American people because of the political divides created by the Russians during that election cycle, and they continue doubling down on that, right? I think in many ways we'll look back on the 2016 elections and say that it was one of the most effective covert influence operations in the history of mankind. It has hamstrung our government from being effective for the past 4 years, and you already see them doing the same in this election cycle. You see Bernie Sanders having been criticized for having been supported by Russians and Russian bots. You obviously know the criticisms made of the president currently in office. I think you'll see more about Vice President Biden too. And I think we have to recognize these for what they are, which is a nation state attacking our political system, and the discord and the disagreement and the political back and forth between the two parties in Congress and between the executive branch and the legislative branch, I think is the result of political manipulations by our enemies. We've got to get past that. Now, am I Pollyannish about it and say it's all going to be kumbaya and we're all going to be able to get together and get along? Of course not. We have very real political disagreements, and that's okay. But also recognizing this for what it is and not allowing those things to divide us, I think is going to be critical, particularly as you try to respond to the economic dislocation from COVID. We're going to spend $4 trillion in debt from this crisis. Already we've spent that. We're going to spend more to come. To come out of that economic deficit, we're going to need bipartisan leadership, and that requires the White House and Congress to be adults and be serious and come together for us as a nation.
So you're suggesting we need to stop taking the bait on a lot of these issues?
I think absolutely, and that goes for leaders on both parties, on both sides of the aisle, in Congress and in the White House. And I think that people, now is the time for leadership. And let's just be candid, we haven't seen enough of that since the 2016 elections on both sides of the street, and we need more of that. We need leaders to step up and lead and recognize this is a crisis. This isn't politics. This isn't about who gets elected the next election. This is about how to bring our nation out of a very serious challenge. And it's one that's going to continue both from a public health perspective, but also from a cyber perspective.
We also see China's playing those same games now too, particularly around the pandemic. I mean, it's really hard to get a sense of what information is accurate, what's not, and they seem to just be stirring that up even more.
They are, and what's amazing to watch, and it's mortifying, is that our own politicians are playing in that sport too, right? We see people sort of taking guesses about what's going to happen, and what's not going to happen, and what's correct, and what the facts are, and what the facts aren't. We need facts, right? And we need to operate on the basis of facts. And so the more we as a body politic can encourage our politicians and our elected leaders to stick to the facts, and encourage and force our allies and our opponents, whether it's China or anybody else, to stick to the facts and get the facts out there. That's the most important thing. In order to really figure out how this virus began and how to avoid it in the future, we need to know what happened in China, what happened in Wuhan. Was it a wet market? Was it a lab? But we need facts to back that up, and we need data to back that up, and we need to understand how this thing spreads. And the more we can get that, the more we can start talking about that, the more important it is. Again, I can't emphasize how important it is that when we're operating, whether it's public health or cybersecurity, the more we can talk about facts and the more we can get to a fact-based discussion, the better off we'll be. And look, let's not let the media be exempt from this either, right? I mean, our own media sort of the back and forth benefit, it gets more eyeballs, right? The sort of the Trump press conferences, the Pelosi response, right? I mean, it gets eyeballs. That's something we need to avoid, right? We need to talk about what is Dr. Fauci saying? What is Dr. Burke telling us, right? What are experts, the epidemiologists saying? And how do we focus on that and get that message out there to the American people, act in a way that is sensible, but also recognize it is important that we get the economy restarted, right? And find that balance between ensuring that our people are safe, but we're also able to get the economy restarted is going to be critical going forward.
So we're going to run out of time here in a couple of minutes. So from a fact perspective, for folks that are listening in, both individuals as well as companies, and especially smaller companies, as we think about reopening and as we think about the next 6, 12, 18 months, how should they be approaching this? What should they be thinking about? Where does this fit in their priorities, and what should they be doing during this time to make the adjustments to the world that we're entering into?
Yeah. Look, I think, Jack, I actually have a lot of hope for both the country and the economy. The American economy is fundamentally sound, right? Yes, we've seen big dislocations. People have been laid off. There are challenges in our economy. But fundamentally, we are still sound as an economy and as a people. We can be successful. I think that this environment provides opportunities for people who are willing to take risk and invest. I think that now is an opportunity while you're at home. There are a lot of opportunities to upskill yourself and to learn things and to get a skill set, new capability, right? So people who have lost their jobs should take advantage of learning opportunities at home with the internet and 5G and broadband available, right? You can learn a lot. There are free universities. There are fairly cheap paid opportunities to learn and upskill yourself. I think there's opportunity here for people to succeed. I think that people should see this as an opportunity to reinvent themselves. And ultimately, look, it's about being safe out there. And so being physically distant doesn't mean you can't have social interaction. You can and should have social interaction. Just maintain a certain amount of distance. Be safe with your families. Recognize that that the older amongst us, those with health conditions, are going to be more vulnerable. So do the right thing. Wear a mask when you can and when it's appropriate. And take care of the people around you. But don't see this challenge as only all bad. There are opportunities here to gain and benefit and to be a productive part of society. I think that's important and a positive message we need to carry forward.
Jamil, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today and sharing some of your insights. I really do appreciate that. I want to thank everybody else for joining us today. And again, we'll have this available on our website by the end of the week. Tomorrow, we're going to bring some folks together. We're going to have a conversation about emerging mental health issues across our region as we continue to work our way through all the different challenges we're facing. So with that, everybody stay well. Jamil, stay well. Look forward to seeing you soon when everything is safe again. And have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Jack.
All right, great. Thank you.